And so I hope that maybe this serves as an example that you too can have difficult conversations with people you love and even people you don't know. And as Ted Lasso says, be curious, not judgmental. And I guess for me, it's about try to connect, not necessarily to correct. Have you been feeling disconnected, worried, or overwhelmed in life, or when you look at the state of our country and the world? If so, you're not alone. I'm right there with you, and you're in the right place. Hi, friends. Welcome to the Connected Way podcast. I'm your host and minister of connection, Rev Dev. I believe that connection is the healing path forward for us as individuals and as a collective. So on this podcast, we will explore all things connection to self, to others, to the land, and spirituality. But specifically in season 1, we are looking at the coming election through the lens of connection, how we can get informed and involved in politics and this election in digestible and engaging ways, how our spiritual and cultural beliefs and values intersect with and inform politics, how this election fits in with the larger evolution of our society, and how we can actually connect with people in these polarizing times. I know that connection has the capacity to move the needle in this election and in our individual and collective evolution. May it be so. Let's get into it. One of the reasons I started this podcast was to help all of us find more connection in these very disconnected and divided times, and specifically to help us connect with people who have different beliefs than we do. Our country seems to be more divided than ever, and it seems that many people can't seemingly coexist or connect with people on the other side of the aisle. It's a terrible reality in our country and one that I hope shifts soon. I will be having guests on this podcast in the coming weeks with experts who can help us have the hard conversations. But I don't want to just talk the talk and recommend you have these across the aisle conversations. I want to have these conversations too. I think it is important to learn to connect across barriers, but also to understand where people are coming from, what they've experienced, and why they make the choices they do. But we're going to start with this one today, which is with someone I love, my Uncle Don. He and I love spending time together whenever we see each other, which isn't enough. We tend to laugh a lot, and when we're together, we bond on things like family, food, skiing, and the outdoors. And we also have different political views. We've never actually really talked about it, not because we've tried and it's gone awry, but we just haven't done it. So today will be the first time we really talk about politics, but we roughly know each other's political views, and we definitely lean in different directions. This conversation has not been prepped or planned. We're just kind of jumping in and seeing where it goes. But first, I want to give you a little bit of background on my Uncle Don. So Don is almost 70 years old. Happy almost birthday. He lives in the southwest corner of Arkansas. It's about an hour from Texas and less than half an hour from Louisiana. He has largely lived there since he was around 8 years old. Prior to that, as a young kiddo, he moved around a lot because his dad, my grandfather, was in the Air Force, but they eventually landed in Arkansas. Don did leave to attend Hendrix College in Arkansas, where he studied natural sciences, did a couple semesters at Harvard studying economics, also did a couple of semesters with National Outdoor Leadership School, also known as NOLS, in the Rocky Mountains and then in Africa. And then eventually he finished up his schooling at Southern Methodist University studying film production. And then family eventually brought him back to Arkansas, and he continued to work in film and advertising production, then worked for a local company that's a big manufacturer of high-end aluminum furniture. He worked for Walmart for a few years while working on his master's, and eventually was a middle school and high school teacher. He is now retired. He owns 2 modest properties, one in town where he lives and another a camp, which is about a half hour away, that has been in the family for years and is an incredibly special place that's near and dear to him and his brothers. And I have very fond memories there as well. It's kind of like a little Walden Pond in Arkansas, and it's pretty amazing. Don has been married for 30 years, has a stepdaughter, and now a granddaughter that he dotes on whenever he can see her. She's very cute. Don, is there anything else that you want to share about your background?
Go Razorbacks.
Love it. I love it. All right, Don. So let's get right into it and start with a really basic question, which is, who are you voting for in the presidential election?
I can tell you straight away that this is a consequential election. However, I'll preface that by saying that the one in 2028, I think, will be even more epic than this one is. For me, it's a choice between who can do the best job for us, has in the past, etc. I have to tell you, I have to vote for Donald Trump. I don't like some of the things he says. I don't like some of the things that he has done. But I will say that he does represent our future for the next 4 years. And so I clearly have to vote for him. And the number one issue is, are we better off today than we were 4 years ago? The vast majority of Americans will tell you they are not better off today.
So I can tell you from my perspective, do you want me to share my perspective?
Absolutely.
On that?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So my perspective on that is that we actually, I don't know that I would say that most Americans believe that we are better off now than we were 4 years ago. But my perspective, Don, is that a lot of what America is struggling with is a result of Trump's time in office. And my perspective and my understanding is that the Biden administration has been doing a lot to affect positive change and has created a ton of new jobs, has done a lot to help the economy, having come out of a pandemic that Trump did not help with. And that I understand what you're saying, that people are not better off. I don't actually think that's because of the Biden-Harris administration. I think that we would be in a far worse place if they had not been in office for the last 4 years.
Devin, I mean, I respect your thought process there and all of that. I'll just say this. The number one issue for most Americans is going to be the economy, without question. And I don't really care that we just had an interest rate drop. That hasn't cooled inflation. Inflation was at 1.9% when Trump was in office, and now it's at 9%. So there are some things. Yes, the pandemic did happen, no doubt about it. Neither one of the administrations are responsible for the pandemic. They are both responsible for dealing with it, etc. So again, all you have to do is look at the price of fuel, the price of housing, good God Almighty, the price of groceries. Everything is up at least 20% across the board. And those prices are not coming down. People just do not have as much money in their pocket as they did 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, for me, I understand completely what you're saying, because no matter where you live in the country, this is affecting you, right? Inflation is a big deal. And actually, my impression and my understanding, because of the news that I see and the things that I listen to, is that things are better than they would be. For sure, that there is a lot that has been put into place and there are a lot of changes that are being made. The pandemic, obviously, as you said, is not something that Trump or the Biden administration are responsible for by any means. But I do think that we would be in a far worse place if Trump was still in office. And I completely understand what you're saying, Donnie. I think that inflation is a huge concern. I think the economy is a huge concern. And to me, I think one of the most important things in terms of the economy is taxes. And so I'm curious about how you feel about Trump's policy on taxes as it relates to the economy, because for me, I think it's important for us to support the middle class, which I know you are and I am, and, really helping people to be able to thrive and have a good life. But I don't like that Trump really is focused on taking care of the very wealthy. And it doesn't feel like it's about the people. It feels like it's about the rich. And so I'm curious how you feel about that with taxes.
Well, with regard to taxes, I mean, we can look in terms of history and look back at, okay, what have the Republicans done? What have the Democrats done? Typically, Democrats are tax and spend, and that's exactly what they're planning on doing as far as their new economic policy goes. I'd be for some sort of balanced budget if you want to get right down to it. Bill Clinton produced a balanced budget in Arkansas, back in the early 90s, and we've kept a surplus every single year since then. What have the elitists done in California but run up a $50 billion deficit? I don't think that's the way to run either a state government or help your people. But getting right at taxes, today Trump said there would be no taxes on overtime. There would be no taxes on tips. There would be no taxes on Social Security for seniors. That's something huge for people who are on fixed incomes. I mean, absolutely huge. So that's a rather interesting proposal by Trump today.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine as long as there is Social Security, which I'm a little bit worried about in general for myself and for the people that I care about.
Okay.
I'm going
to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you here, Devin. Okay, just for a second. Okay. As far as Social Security goes, I totally agree with you. If you're paying in, you deserve to have Social Security. Okay. Now, the problem is, as far as I'm concerned, the Congress has been raiding Social Security from time to time when they've needed cash or needed money to fund a program. It's real easy to go hit Social Security Trust Fund, and that's exactly what they've done. So, in order to maybe offset some of that, yeah, we may have to bite the bullet and actually raise the retirement age a little bit for Social Security to try to save it. Now, can we make some compromises in Social Security? I think we can. Can we make compromise in Medicare, Medicaid? Probably so. But we're not going to do it on the backs of Americans who've been paying in for so long.
Yeah, I mean, so I want to back up for a second, Don. So in general, you're talking about debt that has been caused and Social Security and who's paying for what. So you and I believe, watch very different news and have very different sources of information, which is one of the things that makes it really hard to have conversations like this, because there's a very different focus, but also sometimes there's like different versions of the truth, right? And so that's hard. It's hard to argue when it's like, that's not what I'm hearing. And so it's confusing. It confuses everybody, right? And it's also like, okay, that doesn't feel like the most important issue for me, and it's the most important issue for you. And so it's just not as much of a focus in my mind. I think what I have seen from an economic perspective is that Trump put us in, $8.4 trillion of debt over 10 years. And Biden's administration has put us in half of that, 4.3. And so that's quite measurable. And to me, it feels like the Democrats and Biden and Harris are actually being much more conservative in spending and debt than Trump was and would be. And that there's a lot more consideration for how the wealthy can pay for things, not about how middle-class Americans can pay for things. Like, I think that the wealth tax, which is over people who have over $100 million, is really smart. Do you like that idea or no?
What I like is that I don't think, quote, a wealth tax is going to produce the kind of additional funding that people think it's going to create. What's going to create funding is going to be taxing the middle class, and I promise you it's coming. And that's just the way it is. And Devin, you brought it up, and I'll echo the sentiments with you. You may not believe it, but I do look at CNN, the mainstream networks, and of course I do look at Fox because they're the only news source on that side. News, in theory, yes, should be unbiased, but you and I both know that every news outlet is biased.
Yeah.
Period. I mean that's just the way it is. But what's also true here is that I honestly believe that the liberal media, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, even PBS now, I believe that they knew what the condition was of Joe Biden, and they weren't going to say anything about it because they were trying to protect him. And
the condition in terms of his like mental capacity, is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. So my point being here is that the media covered for him for a long, long time. And then all of a sudden, once he was exposed in the debate, people, I'm shocked at his condition. Don't you think the people in the White House, don't you think the administration officials, and certainly don't you think foreign leaders knew that Biden was slipping and was slipping very fast? So I really have, when you're talking about truth, Devin, as far as the media presenting the truth out there, it's really whichever version you think the truth is. The truth should be somewhere in the middle, but it's not. It's real polar. It's either extreme left or extreme right.
Yeah. And I mean, my perspective, just so you're aware, Don, is that I think that Biden did not handle that debate well. I think that he's not the best speaker when it comes to debates. But to me personally, Don, I think that Trump's behavior is far more concerning than Biden's because he's just lying, straight up lying, and also incredibly rude, very condescending. And that is upsetting to me. And to me, he's coming across as a narcissist who cares nothing about other people. He's making stuff up. And I also find it really fascinating personally. This is what I think is interesting, is that some of the ways that Trump acts really can throw people off. And Kamala was not as thrown off as obviously Biden was, but there's a literal term for what Trump was doing in that first debate, and it's called Gish Gallop, which I had never heard of. So I was, of course, as someone who's like interested in psychology and things like that, I was like, what is this? And so it turns out then when someone puts out all these lies and non sequiturs and sort of it throws someone off. And I think especially with Biden having a stutter, it was a lot to deal with, but that does not excuse the fact that it was a bad performance. But I do not think that Biden's mental state and mental capacity is nearly as compromised as it is being portrayed in some media. And I do think that he has done an incredible job. And for me personally, I feel that he has done the most patriotic thing that he could do by saying, I'm going to step aside. And I'm not the right person for this. And for Democrats, he was thinking, maybe I'm not going to win this and I need to let someone else sort of step up and be the new generation of Democrats. I really appreciate that, especially because he paved the way for a woman of color, which I really appreciate. But I think that Trump's behavior is more dangerous than Biden's personally.
Well, I think a lot of it is just perspective. I'll agree with you that, Trump says things that, once again, like I stated at the beginning, he says things that, just they rub people the wrong way. And then he does things that rub people the wrong way. I get that. But you know what? Point out a president who doesn't have ego. Show me a leader of the United States who doesn't have power. Every one of those people has power. With power comes ego. And I don't care who you're talking about. Responsibility. Everybody is going to be caught up in the, I'm living in the White House, and whoa, I'm the most powerful person in the world. It has to affect everybody. Everybody.
Yeah.
I don't care.
I mean,
I don't care who you are.
I understand what you're saying, Don, but I think that this is different. I mean, yes, I think that with power can come ego and confidence and arrogance. And that's a problem, right? I think that that ego can come with great power, but also great power has to come with responsibility. And I don't feel that Trump ever showed any sense of responsibility to the people. I think he showed responsibility to people that he cares about and to himself. It seems to me like he's really caring about himself. And actually, I just recently saw something, I think on Instagram or somewhere, that was showing past presidential debates. And it was so fascinating to see some of these people like Al Gore, who didn't win, of course, but was very close. And I really respected him as a leader. And I respected George Bush and all these people. In their debates, they're like, you know what? I said that wrong. I'm sorry. Like they're actually showing up as people who can accept that they've made a mistake. There's a sense of humility and a sense of accountability, which for me is incredibly important for someone to be able to show up and be able to be human and make mistakes, because we all make mistakes, right? So to be able to accept that, to admit that, and have the self-awareness of saying like, you know what, I didn't do that quite right. Let me learn and grow from that, as opposed to thinking that they do everything right. To me, there's a really big difference between having an ego and being, I would imagine that Trump is a clinical narcissist. And so he cannot do anything wrong. He lies pathologically. And that's so concerning to me. And he doesn't treat anybody with respect. And that's so upsetting to me. And it just feels like everything is a manipulation. And that is what scares me so much, Don. Like, I'm worried. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that you think that 2028 is the most important election. I am scared, legitimately, Don. I am scared that there will not be an election in 2028. Like he has specifically said at rallies, you don't even need to vote. You don't need to vote, or like vote one last time and you'll never have to vote again. Like isn't that terrifying to you?
That's just like the bloodbath comment. It's taken out of context. I saw the entire interview, both exactly what you're talking about and the one that I mentioned regarding the bloodbath. He was talking about the auto industry was going to take a bloodbath if Kamala Harris was successful in pushing electric vehicles on the American people like she wanted the mandate for. And so, Devin, what I'm saying here is that, yes, Trump has made mistakes. I don't know of a president who hasn't made mistakes, or even former presidents that have made mistakes. Here's what it's coming down to for me right now. We've got a really dangerous world. We've got a really bad situation going in the Middle East. We've got a really bad situation going in Ukraine. We've got a terrible, terrible situation on our southern border. And I'm telling you right now that I don't believe that world leaders will respect Kamala Harris if she is elected. Number one, I'm not even sure what her policies are. She seems to take everything so lightly and jokes and laughs about everything. It's almost hard for me to take her seriously. It really is. And so I think what we're talking about here are personal feelings as to, what we think these people are really like, and all we have is what we're being presented, what the presentation is. We know what Trump's presentation is. We see it all the time. Kamala Harris, we have absolutely no idea what she's about. She's done 0 interviews, basically. Trump's done probably 100 or 150. She doesn't
That's
answer
not true,
questions.
Donnie. I mean,
She
that's
doesn't
so
answer
hard to
questions,
hear.
Devin. She doesn't answer questions.
And you think Trump does? That's the thing that's so interesting to me, Donnie, about these conversations is that, like what you just said, all of the things that you just said, right, about laughing and not having policies. And to me, it sounds like you're talking about Trump and you're talking about Kamala, right? Kamala actually did introduce a whole bunch of policies. And somehow Trump supporters don't have any recollection of that or don't see that. And in the debate, she was actually presenting some of the policies that she has. And so it's just so fascinating to me. And I know that it's like one of these things where it's like, okay, you have your news and your information sources and I have mine. But to me, she's done a ton of interviews. She has been very of the people. She's very out there. I think that she wasn't as publicly viewed during the Biden administration as I think she could have been. But obviously, nobody thought that she was going to be running for president. But ever since she's run, and I mean, I can send you some of the things that she had, like where she's presented, where she's spoken. She, to me, in my view, she is of the people. And she cares about people, like genuinely, she cares about people. And every single interview that I've seen has continuously shown that, and that she wants to do better. And when you talk about all these dangerous situations, I want to specifically mention Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East. It's terrifying to me how close Trump is to Netanyahu and Putin. I think that he is chummy with them. And I do not think that he has the chops to make change. I don't think he knows anything about policy. And there are so many people in different administrations, in different countries, who absolutely will not even look at Trump or have a conversation with him because he's so rude. And Kamala has a lot of experience with talking with people and dealing with difficult people. And I think that she's going to be far more successful in dealing with foreign policy and dealing with foreign governments and taking stances on things and making change than Trump will, because it feels like Trump is just in it for himself. And that's what I'm seeing. So it's so fascinating for you and I to have these very different viewpoints. And like when you're talking about the labor market and the auto industry is going to be a bloodbath, when in fact electric vehicles are actually completely revolutionizing the labor market in my mind and are creating millions of jobs. Like renewable energy has created millions of jobs. And that seems to just not be a part of the news in some cases.
Devin, here's the thing. They've spent about maybe $5 to $8 billion trying to roll out this EV. Hey, guess what? They've got 5 or 6 charging stations across the U.S. Whoa, that's very impressive. Very impressive, Devin. Let me tell you something. They stopped the Keystone Pipeline. Now she's flip-flopping. And, see, that's what bothers me here too, Devin. She said, EV mandate. Well, that would have killed the auto industry without question. They shut the Keystone Pipeline down. What did that do? Oil prices went through the roof. So now what I'm telling you is she wants to open up drilling and all that kind of stuff magically now, right here before the election. No, we know what energy is all about being down here in South Arkansas. We especially know now in my county right here, because this is where lithium is going to be produced domestically. So we're quite aware of all of the benefits that can happen when you drill domestically. So for people like who live in California or elsewhere to try to dictate energy policy when they use the vast majority of the energy, hey, that's very, very hypocritical. So, let us do what we do best in the U.S. Let us produce energy. Sure, I'm good with wind, I'm good with solar, But right now, we need to take advantage of our natural resources and use them, because if we do get into a war, it's going to be bad news, and we'll need every available ounce of fuel. But that brings up another point, Devin. What kind of wars were we in when Trump was in office? None. Inflation was low. People thought they had more money in their pocket. No, I didn't like what he did on January the 6th or whatever in terms of sending the guys up to the Capitol. Anybody that tore up property or harmed a policeman or anything like that, should they be prosecuted? You better believe it.
I mean, one of the things that I'm hearing you talk about is the stuff around war. I'm not as concerned about, okay, what happens if we go to war here? I'm more concerned about the environment as a whole. And so for me, renewable energy is non-negotiable, and extracting more oil doesn't feel like the right answer because we are in a massive climate crisis. And as someone who I know from personal experience, you care so much about nature and you care so much about the environment. So I'm curious, what do you believe about global warming and these?
Well, I definitely believe that global warming is a phenomenon, no doubt about it. Have greenhouse gases contributed to that? Probably so. But
definitely so. It's proven scientifically, yeah.
The country is not in a position at this time to go fully electric. There's no infrastructure whatsoever. They've had 3.5 years to build up the infrastructure, and they've got 5 charging stations. So what I'm saying is, that it sounds fantastic and everybody wants it and all that kind of thing. But I promise you, I bet you're still putting gasoline in your car. And until we can reduce that down, we've got to keep pumping oil and we've got to keep pumping natural gas. And that's just the way it is.
I mean, for me, it's more important to look at how can we build up renewables. I think that the war in Russia and Ukraine really affected gas prices. It isn't just the Keystone Pipeline. And I believe that we should not be drilling for more oil. I feel like we need to do everything that we possibly can to get to renewables, period, and not just with electric vehicles. But in general, my hope is that very quickly as possible, we will be in a renewable place so that we have a chance of surviving as a society and as a species, and that we have a chance of saving some of the species that are being destroyed by our impact as humans on this earth, which is so upsetting to me.
Well, Devin, I mean, I can say this honestly. Not nobody, but there aren't many people that can appreciate nature like I do and like you do.
I know.
And so, there's no question to me at all. Yeah, we need to do things that are more responsible, etc. And I'm with you on that, Devin. But we're at 2 or 3 particularly serious crisis points right now. And you brought up the Middle East a minute ago. I believe that the person who's best able to defend Israel is going to be Donald Trump. You can't tell me Kamala Harris is going to defend Israel with the same vigor. If we have a nuclear war, you don't have to worry about climate change anymore. We'll have a nuclear winter, and it'll take hundreds of years, if that, to clear things up. And for those that went underground, maybe they'll still be alive. But, maybe it's a good thing that we're heading out in space and looking for other areas to colonize.
I mean, I think that this is the culmination of a lot of toxic behavior and toxic systems that need to change. And my hope is that we're on the cusp of a lot of change that would be really positive. And my deepest hope is that change happens and that you and all of the Americans that you're talking about benefit from it, that we all benefit from it, because we are all connected and we are meant to be taking care of one another. And, I think that saying like, okay, we're going to have a nuclear war, and so let's not worry about global warming, let's worry about protecting ourselves, that doesn't feel smart to me, and it doesn't feel real. I want to back up for a second because you brought this up. What's happening in Gaza, for me, you're saying that nobody is better equipped to defend Israel. That may be true because Netanyahu and Trump are best buddies. And so, Trump could help Netanyahu, but I think Netanyahu is evil. And I think that what he is doing is so wrong. And I believe that what needs to happen is actually for there to be a ceasefire. I think that we need to protect Palestinian lives and we need to stop helping with the killing. And so I actually believe that Kamala has a far better chance of bringing peace in the Middle East than Trump does. Trump perhaps could defend Israel, but defending Israel is the goal right now. I think it's finding peace and stopping the killing and finding a way for these two peoples to coexist in some capacity, or at least to remain alive. And that's what feels important to me. But I also think that there's stuff going on underneath the surface that has a lot to do with power and oil. And so that's another reason, yet again, that I feel really strongly about renewables becoming the way of the future, because I think that oil has just caused so much toxic power in the world, including with Putin, including in Ukraine. That's why all the gas prices went up, right? There's all these pieces to it. And it is so complicated, like you've said, but I think it's so important to focus on like, what do we know right now, right? What do we know right now? We know right now that people are dying. We know right now that species are going extinct. We know right now for certain that global warming is a massive threat to our country, to our world, to our planet, and to our species as a whole. All of the things that are happening with the climate crisis, it terrifies me for my niece and nephew, and for your granddaughter, it terrifies me. And I don't have my own children, but I am so scared about the world that we are leaving behind for the legacy that we have. And in addition to the killing that's happening overseas, there's also all this killing happening here. We're not taking care of each other. So I'm curious about how you feel about guns, Don. How do you feel about like the school shootings?
Everybody, okay, we can talk about Second Amendment rights, yada, yada. But the bottom line is the gun doesn't pull the trigger, period. Right. Somebody pulls the trigger. The trigger is not pulled by the gun. The gun does not know. And so what I'm telling you is this. Gun ownership, well, it's a right that we have. Closing a gun show loophole, that's not going to do much because illegal guns are not sold at gun shows. Illegal guns are sold elsewhere. They're not sold by legal people at a gun show. Okay?
But what do you think about getting rid of assault rifles and background checks and red flag laws and things that would keep people who should not? I understand that there is a black market and there are ways for people to illegally purchase guns, but we don't have gun restrictions. I mean, that's so terrifying to me. And there's also this obsession with guns in our country. And so do you feel okay about background checks? That feels just common sense to me. And so I'm wondering how you feel about, restrictions about who can buy guns.
Do parents who give their kids weapons need to be held accountable? Yes, they do. They're responsible. For their children, period. There are locks, there are ways to prevent those guns from getting loose. But it's not going to stop the illegal purchase of guns on the street. I
get that. But what if we had some restrictions like background checks? Like a lot of the school shootings could have potentially been prevented if there had been background checks or red flag laws.
Our most precious resource is our children.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to tell you now, there are ways to protect our children. Okay? Do we have to build serious impediments for people coming on to school campuses? Sure. Do we need metal detectors? Sure. Do we need more policemen at schools? Sure. Here's the way to do it, Devin. There are so many retired policemen and military people who have extensive training that could go into all of these schools, and with cutting off some of the access to some of the school campuses, you could reduce these killings for sure, without question. Now, are we going to eliminate all of them? No. But if you restrict the sale of guns, is that going to prevent somebody from buying a gun if they want to? Not at all. They can go anywhere to any street corner in any town, and you can buy a weapon if you want it bad enough. So,
but why are you against reform? Like, because I feel that it would prevent some of these shootings, similar to how you're saying that putting cops in every school would prevent most, but not all.
The red flag stuff that you're talking about, background checks, if no one is communicating with each other, no one is sharing this information, various government entities are not sharing information with each other. Oh, this poor child has a mental problem, but because of privacy, we cannot share that. Devin, you've got a lot of moving parts with regard to weaponizing children and stuff like that. A far bigger problem than the gun itself is the cell phone that these kids have. Far and away, the most destructive thing in schools today is allowing people to use cell phones.
I understand that, Don, but I don't think that means that we shouldn't be, making reform with gun laws. It just doesn't make sense to me because there are absolutely ways to implement it.
Secret Service does not talk to the FBI. The FBI does not talk to the NSA. I can go on and on and on where, in terms of government structure, nobody wants to talk to anybody because they want to keep their information private. And
so you're saying that these wouldn't work because these government agencies don't talk to each other?
That can't work because no one is sharing information.
I don't agree with that. I don't think that that's necessarily necessary in order for these reforms to work, but we can agree to disagree as we have been.
But Devin, background checks are not going to work if you don't know that the kid has a mental problem.
Right. There's no perfect answer, but I do think that it makes an immense amount of sense to implement all that we can to keep our children safe. And there's a lot more than just children, right? I mean, Lewiston, Maine, there was a massive shooting here.
We had a shooting here 40 miles up the road in Fordyce, Arkansas, in a grocery store, for God's sake. A disgruntled white guy in his 50s.
I don't think you can prevent every single incident by having cops everywhere, which also feels so damaging to children and to people. I mean, that doesn't feel like the right solution.
Devin, you brought it up. Kamala wanted to defund the police in 2019. It's on CNN. It's on every channel that there is.
I don't believe that's true.
And so the answer, go ask the people in Seattle if they believe that defunding the police, or in Portland, is a great idea. I don't think they're going to think that. Go ask the people that live on the southern border, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California. Ask them if they think that, come on.
My understanding is that when she talked about praising the defunding the police movement, it was about, encouraging people to take a stand and just speak up for what they care about and for what they believe is important. And also defunding the police can look very different. It's not just getting rid of the police in general. And I think that police reform is absolutely necessary because of all the police shootings as well. So I want to move on to another topic that's
go for it.
One of the most important topics to me.
Okay.
Which is abortion.
All right.
And so I know that you've mentioned that the economy, like the majority of Americans, the economy is the thing that's going to make people vote. And I think actually abortion is up there. And so I am wondering how you feel about the changes that have occurred because of who Trump has put into the Supreme Court and how you feel about him and abortion.
Okay, first off, let's talk about the Supreme Court. Look, I don't know why everybody's up in such an uproar. The pendulum swings in various decades from Democrat heavy to conservative, et cetera. And that's exactly what we have going on right now. We just happen to be in a conservative phase.
But I think it's
trying to jam the court with new justices just because you don't like the makeup. Well, that's not the way our designers designed it. And so, but let's get right down to it.
Okay, hold on one second, Don. I just want to respond to that. My impression, and very similar to my sort of experience of Republicans historically, I have respected a lot of Republicans historically. And I agree that with the partisan model, there's these swings in the pendulum from being a more Democratic to a more Republican Supreme Court. I think that what is currently present is incredibly corrupt and is not legal. I mean, I think that the way that some of these things have played out is just absolutely horrendous and is not actually aligned with the Constitution. And I think that there's Christianity at play and there's a lot of corruption at play. And so I'm not worried about it being a Republican heavy Supreme Court. I'm worried about the incredible corruption and terrible decisions that are being made that are actually unconstitutional. So that's my concern, just to be clear.
Okay, let's address abortion. First off, the government should have no business legislating morality, okay? Period. I don't care what government you're talking about, So, with regard to abortion, my own personal belief is this. There should be no federal funding used for abortion, period. I am not as a means of, I got pregnant, as a means of birth control. Sorry, that's not how I feel about it. Should there be exceptions for rape, incest, etc.? Of course, those are normal things. People should be able to make that kind of decision if they have to. It's terrible, but people do. But if you're saying that abortion is between you as a woman and your doctor and your own conscience, okay, that's fine. But it's a states' rights issue and shouldn't have ever become a federally mandated pro or con. Leave it to the states. Let the states decide for their residents how they want it to be, okay? So
why?
Say, for instance, Massachusetts says, hypothetically, says, no abortion. Okay, we'll go to Rhode Island and get one if they allow it. You see what I'm saying here, and that's what people are having to do. But there should be no federal mandate that says, yes, we will have abortion in every single state. I just think that the state should decide that.
Why do you think states should decide that?
Because I don't have a right to tell you, as a person who lives in Maine, what to do. Just like you don't have a right to tell me or anybody in Arkansas what to do. It should be my own state issue and then deal with it from there. But it shouldn't be some crazy new amendment to the Constitution to make abortion legal. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, let me ask you something, Don. What's the difference between the U.S. government legislating it and regulating morality versus the state government regulating morality?
Well, once again, I don't tell you how to tax your businesses or do anything in Maine or Massachusetts. I can only tell you what issues I vote on here in Arkansas, and that's what applies to me. Whatever you guys do in Maine or in Massachusetts, that's y'all's business. That's not my business.
But why is it any different? Like what, I have so many thoughts on this, but I'm trying to understand your argument about the state.
Because the federal government shouldn't take a stand one way or the other.
Well, should the state then?
Absolutely.
Why?
I live in a state. You live in a state.
I also live in a country.
You live in a town. Do you want the city of Portland to decide whether you can have an abortion in Portland versus, say, in Auburn or, or something like that. You see what I'm getting at? I mean, in other words, those are local decisions, and that's the way it should be.
I think they are the most local decisions, Don. They are the decision of my body and my choice. Like this is not something that should be taken away. It is a right, and it is healthcare. It is healthcare.
Let me ask you this. If you got pregnant, you were not using any kind of birth control, you couldn't afford to have the baby. So are you saying it's okay then just to go ahead and have an abortion?
Well, first of all, Don, I want to be very clear. That is far from the majority of most abortions. And in those cases, those are likely cases where people do not have access to contraception because of the poverty level or for whatever reason. So I want to be really clear about that. The majority of abortions are absolutely not that. And 1 in 4 women in America has had an abortion. Do you know anybody who has had an abortion?
Sure do.
Great. And what do they feel about this?
It may have happened 50 years ago, but they think about it every day.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that you know a lot more people who have had abortions, and they may not talk to you about it, but it was absolutely their right to make a decision about their body. I don't understand why you think it's okay for anybody to decide what I do with my body or what Elizabeth does with her body or what any woman that you know, any girl that you know does with her body. Because let's say, for example, a woman is on contraception, she's on the pill, or she uses a condom and the condom breaks. Something happens. She gets pregnant and she knows that she is not going to be able to provide the home and the love that that child that could possibly become needs and deserves. And she makes the loving decision.
Hey, you know what, Devin? There are other options. There are other options. Some of it
meaning adoption.
Adoption.
So you believe that it's fine for the government to say, you know what, you can't have an abortion. You can't make a choice that is right for you and for everybody. So let's have more children who don't have homes.
The government isn't saying that, though, Devin. The government
You're talking about the state government saying that. I mean, it's literally, if someone in Arkansas has an abortion right now or performing an abortion, they can get fined $100,000 or go to jail for 10 years.
Oh, I know full well. I have many friends that are surgeons, etc. So, these are discussion points that we have and we talk about all the time.
And Donnie, would you not want me to have a choice?
Yes, of course I would want you to have a choice. But, Devin, I'll say the same thing. If young ladies or even young men, if they think the only option to having a baby is having an abortion, well, you can have the baby. There are a lot of parents out there who would love to be able to adopt a child.
Do you know how many kids are in foster care right now, Don?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly what the number is. I can tell you the exact number in Arkansas right now.
But it's not a good argument, Don. It's just not. It's not a good idea for people to be forced to have children that they don't want to have so that they can give them up and put them into the system. Like, that's not the point. And imagine going through 9 months of a pregnancy that you don't want and you know that you don't want. Regardless of what our different beliefs are, I think that's completely not okay to force someone to have a child.
Devin, should the federal government pay for abortions?
It's an interesting point that you bring up about payment, right? So whether it's paid for or not, then to me, it's not about payment. And I think that's a separate issue that I actually don't have enough information on personally about how abortions are paid for right now. I don't think that's the question. And maybe, if that's really an issue that Republicans had an issue with, then they reform how it's paid for and it becomes private pay. And then a lot of people are going to do a lot of donating to pay for that. I would gladly pay for someone to have health care that they need. And I would also gladly pay for someone to be taken care of if they need to be taken care of. I also think it's hard when right now in our country, the system is so not set up for people to raise children. It is so expensive to raise a child right now. There is not built-in systems for people to raise kids. Childcare is absurd. And I think that to tell someone you have to have a child because you got pregnant, by some crazy odd or statistic that has nothing to do with you not being careful. You just got pregnant, or, hey, guess what? You had a miscarriage and now you're not going to be able to have, the pregnancy matter that needs to be removed from your body. And it's going to cause septic shock and all kinds of things. There's just too many things here, Don. It's so dangerous to be telling people what they can and can't do.
Hey, Devin, you are making a good point that for those, and for lack of a better word, I'll use the word isolated, those isolated cases. But what do you say to those women who are in poverty right now and are having their 6th or 7th or 8th child and can't pay for them?
Yeah, so I think that is really upsetting, and I feel terrible for women in that situation. I think that it's really complicated. I think our system is totally screwed up. And I think that Kamala has the capacity to build a system that will actually support those people. I think that Donald Trump will completely obliterate those women. And I think that it's really dangerous to have someone in office who does not care about women's rights at all. In fact, probably the opposite in my mind. And then I also, to the same point, Don, I have a lot of queer friends. I have a lot of friends who are in same-sex marriages, and I have a lot of friends who are trans. And I'm worried about them too. And so I'm wondering how you feel. Am I worried about them?
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Okay, because that brings up an interesting point, Devin. There should be no federal funding paying for children having transgender surgery.
Is that currently happening?
It's happening all over the place.
You're saying that there's that may be true. I don't know about the public funding. This is something that you're hearing about that I don't know.
Well, no. What I'm saying is that there are people who are transgender who are underage. And I'm telling you right now that there's no 14, 15, 16, 17, or 18-year-old who has the mental capacity to be able to understand the complexity of that situation and then decide, okay, yeah, I'm 14 or 15. I'm going to go ahead and I want to be a woman or I want to be a man if their gender was otherwise. I'm telling you, they don't have the capacity. My doctor friends tell me this. There's no way that a 14 or 15-year-old has that kind of decision-making power.
I mean, I think that it's complicated, and I also trust that people do know who they are. And there are 5 and 6-year-olds who are like, I'm not a boy. I am a girl. I am a girl. I am a girl. And the amount of trauma that it causes them to be told that they are not is terrible. And the amount of trauma that it causes people to be told that they are not gay is terrible. And I think that we should trust people. And I think that there are beautiful systems that have been set up for trans people to help them understand who they are. There are requirements about how much therapy and counseling someone needs to go through before they undergo any type of gender reassignment therapy, and especially surgery, which, by the way, is not being performed on illegal aliens in prison. I thought that was absolutely absurd when he said that. And I think it's so important for us to trust people and to take care of people. These people are being so marginalized, and they are being just absolutely obliterated by these potential policies. I think what really matters is about giving people rights here in this country to live in safety and to have their own experience and to make their own decisions. And that goes for trans rights, goes for same-sex marriage, and it goes for abortion and everything. And I think that's just us being kind people, letting people be who they are and fully express themselves and make their own decisions, and trusting people and saying, you know what, you know what's best for you. I don't know what's best for you. You know what's best for you. And again, I think that's what matters to me, right? In general, with all these things around rights. So Don, in general, I mean, we've been talking for quite a while. I guess before we sort of close up, is there anything that you want to finish with?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting here is that a lot of the Trump support are from probably white, disenfranchised voters who feel like that they don't have a place anymore with DEI and things like that. I mean, how has DEI worked out? Not too well, Devin. All you have to do is look at the Secret Service. That the group at Butler were DEI hires, and they were just temporary there. They had absolutely almost no training, period. And so what I'm telling you is that people should be hired on their merits. The best qualified, regardless of race, regardless of age, yada, yada, yada. But that's not what's being done. This DEI is a quota system, and it's ridiculous because you're not getting the very best in these positions. You know, I mean, if all you want is to make sure that society from a percentage standpoint mirrors itself demographically and everything will be all right, well, that's just not the way it is. I think that because the media is so overwhelmingly biased against Trump, I honestly believe that we will be in a worse position if she ends up being elected. I honestly believe that.
I know you do. And it's hard to hear, honestly. We do have very different opinions. We have very different experiences. And I think we also have very different inputs in terms of media and what's being, what's prioritized, what's shown to us, and what we consume, right? And so that's such a confusing and complicated factor. For your reference, I not only think that with Trump, we would be in a far worse place, like far, far, far worse. I actually think that it would be destructive. And I feel that Kamala is by far the best option for this country. And I think that in terms of like DEI hires and I think that DEI is really complicated. I think that race is incredibly complicated. And I think that, that people that are not white have gone through hell at the hands of white people. And that's complicated. How do we deal with that, right? And I also think that it's incredibly hopeful and inspiring to me, the possibility and my hope that a woman of color will hopefully be our next president, and that I hope that more people who do reflect the way that our country looks, meaning not quite so white, will come into office, and that our government will at some point reflect more of who we are as a people in general. So that's my hope.
Devin, I feel just as passionate about what I've said as you do about what you've said. The bottom line is that most of us that are here are actually Americans and actually citizens. And something you haven't touched on at all is immigration. You haven't touched on that at all.
Yeah, I meant to. Sorry.
If we don't shut that border down, there's going to be a lot more people dying from fentanyl, because the vast majority of fentanyl comes in through automobiles, not containers, not semi-trucks. It comes in the form of automobiles that cross the border almost 200,000 times a day.
Yeah, so I meant to speak to immigration. I apologize that I didn't get to that. So I agree with you that fentanyl is a huge problem. It is a huge problem in our country, and it's a really important issue. But I don't think that we have to shut down the border because of fentanyl coming into the country. I think that it's a complicated, very, very, very complicated issue. And I also feel really strongly that it's important that we take care of people. I think this is complicated and complex, and there are so many pieces to it. But I don't think that it's okay. I mean, I think that we're meant to be a melting pot country. So I think saying you can't have freedom, you can't have rights, you can't have safety is not okay. From a moral and spiritual perspective, for me, that doesn't feel okay to be like, hey, if you are in danger of dying, I'm going to keep you from safety and survival. That doesn't feel okay. And so I don't think there's an easy answer. And I don't think that shutting down the border is the answer either. But I agree that there are questions and there needs to be change, but I don't know what that means. And I definitely know that building a wall and wasting an immense amount of money on it is not the answer. And so I think that immigration is important. It's an important issue. And I know it's really important to you. And I don't have the answers, but I think that Kamala is going to deal with it better than Trump would. So,
well, but the thing is, Devin, she's had 3.5 years. She and Biden, she owns Biden as far as his policies go and everything else.
That's not true, Don. It's just not true. I know that's what you think is true, but it's not. That's not what I think is true, and it's not what I've seen in the news. And again, that's like such a good illustration, I think, of one of the biggest issues here right now is that we just have very different versions of the truth because we're listening to and hearing very different things. And that's so hard because we can't disprove each other, right? When it's not about proving or disproving anything, but it is hard because it's hard to connect when we can't have conversations about the exact same facts, right? And so it's tough. And I will tell you, to the point that I was making earlier, I'll tell you that for me, how am I feeling? I'm feeling exhausted. It's tiring, but I also am feeling grateful to you for being willing to have this conversation. I'm feeling grateful to understand some of the perspective that you have, which is sort of what I assumed it was. Good for me to hear about different perspectives and different experiences and versions of the truth. And so I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. And I hope that we can have these conversations more and more. And then for the listeners, I just want to say thank you for joining us. This has been a long conversation, so thanks for joining us for the whole ride. It's a vulnerable thing to have this conversation knowing that it will be broadcast on an episode, but it also feels important to put into action how we can connect even across these barriers and to understand where people with different political views are coming from. So this, I'm sure, wasn't perfect. No conversation ever is. And no relationship is perfect. And so that's not the point or the goal, at least for me. The intention in having this conversation is to connect with someone that I love. And so I hope that maybe this serves as an example that you too can have difficult conversations with people you love and even people you don't know. And as Ted Lasso says, be curious, not judgmental. And I guess for me, it's about try to connect, not necessarily to correct. So, Don, thank you for joining me. And for the listeners, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me for this episode of The Connected Way. You can find all the resources mentioned in the show and even more resources in the show notes and on the podcast page at theconnectedway.com/podcast. Before you go, a note about sponsorship. This podcast is currently sponsored by me, Rev Dev, and you, the listeners. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and the work of The Connected Way, enhancing individual and collective connection to self, others, the land, and spirituality, you can donate on the podcast webpage. There is never any pressure or expectation. And so I hope that maybe this serves as an example that you too can have difficult conversations with people you love and even people you don't know. And as Ted Lasso says, be curious, not judgmental. And I guess for me, it's about try to connect, not necessarily to correct. Have you been feeling disconnected, worried, or overwhelmed in life, or when you look at the state of our country and the world? If so, you're not alone. I'm right there with you, and you're in the right place. Hi, friends. Welcome to